The email from my mother arrived with a cheerful subject line: "Great news about grandfather's estate." I should have known better than to open it during my lunch break at work. As my eyes scanned the message, I felt the blood drain from my face. "We've decided to use your portion of Harold's inheritance to fund Megan's new wellness center. She's so passionate about this venture, and we know you're doing fine with your job. You've always been so understanding, Becca." Understanding. That's what they called it when they took what was rightfully mine and handed it to my younger sister. What my parents didn't realize was that 3 months ago, I had received a different letter, one delivered by private courier from my grandfather's personal attorney. Under no circumstances is this to be shared with anyone until the appropriate time, Grandpa Harold had written in his familiar slanted handwriting. "Rebecca, you were always the one who listened. My name is Rebecca Wilson, and at 32, I was about to teach my family a lesson about assumptions and secret wills they would never forget. I grew up in the shadow of my sister's spotlight. While Megan dazzled with her outgoing personality and ambitious dreams, I was the reliable one. The steady daughter who helped around the house, maintained perfect grades, and never caused trouble. Our modest craftsman home in Portland's Sellwood neighborhood was filled with trophies and certificates, mostly Megan's. My academic achievements were expected. Her participation awards were celebrated. Becca, can you help your sister with her science project? Became the soundtrack of my childhood, even though I was preparing for my own exams. Becca, we need to use your college fund to help Megan attend that special performing arts summer camp. The pattern was established early. My sacrifices were necessary for Megan's success. After college, I secured a position at Riverfront Financial Advisors, while Megan bounced between aspirations. First a dance studio that closed within 8 months. Then an organic food truck that she abandoned when the early mornings proved too demanding. Followed by an online lifestyle brand that gained followers but generated no income. Each venture was funded by my parents' retirement savings or second mortgages, while I quietly built my career, moving from assistant to junior advisor, saving diligently and living modestly in a small Pearl District apartment. During family dinners at our parents' home, conversation revolved around Megan's latest endeavors. "The wellness center is going to be revolutionary," she'd explain, gesturing enthusiastically while our parents nodded with admiration. "People want holistic approaches to health, meditation spaces, organic juice cleanses, crystal healing workshops." "It sounds wonderful, honey," Mom would say, serving extra helpings to Megan first. "Becca, tell Megan about that investment thing you mentioned last week. Maybe you could help with her business plan." I would provide practical advice that was invariably deemed too conservative, too cautious. "That's why you're good with numbers. And I'm good with people," Megan would laugh, patting my hand condescendingly. The fact that I had quietly built a client portfolio worth millions, or that I'd been selected for the firm's accelerated leadership program, remained unmentioned. In my family, I was just sensible Becca, who worked at some financial company and could be counted on in emergencies. When Grandpa Harold passed away 6 months ago, I was the one who handled the funeral arrangements, contacted distant relatives, and helped Mom and Dad through their grief. Megan was in Bali on a business research retreat that featured heavily on her Instagram, but couldn't be interrupted. "She's networking with important wellness influencers," Mom explained, while I filled out paperwork at the funeral home. What no one knew was that during the last years of his life, Grandpa and I had grown close. On Sunday afternoons, I would drive to his farmhouse in Hood River, helping maintain his property and listening to stories about his life. "You remind me of myself, Becca," he'd say, blue eyes twinkling beneath bushy eyebrows. "Never needing the spotlight, but seeing everything." I treasured those quiet conversations on his porch, watching the sunset over the orchards while everyone else in the family was too busy to notice his loneliness. The reading of Grandpa Harold's will was scheduled for 2 weeks after the funeral. but Megan's business commitments delayed it by a month. When we finally gathered in Marcus Rivera's law office, Megan arrived 20 minutes late, dressed in designer yoga wear and apologizing profusely about traffic. "As you know," Marcus began once we were all seated, "Harold left his primary estate to be divided equally among his son Thomas and his 2 granddaughters." He adjusted his glasses, reviewing the document before him. "The family home and surrounding property in Hood River, along with his primary liquid assets, are to be distributed with 50% to Thomas Wilson, 25% to Rebecca Wilson, and 25% to Megan Wilson." The farmhouse was worth nearly $2 million, with liquid assets of another $1 million. It was more than any of us had expected, especially considering Grandpa's modest lifestyle. I would receive enough to buy a proper home and perhaps start my own financial advisory practice, something I'd been quietly planning for years. As we left the attorney's office, Dad placed his arm around Megan's shoulders. "This couldn't have come at a better time. The wellness center you've been planning, this could be the capital you need to make it exceptional." "I was thinking exactly that," Megan exclaimed. "The universe provides." Mom turned to me. "You'll probably just save yours, right, Becca? You're always so good with money." I nodded non-committally, already calculating what this inheritance could mean for my future. What I didn't say was that Grandpa Harold had called me to his bedside 3 days before he passed, gripping my hand with surprising strength. "There's more to the story, Becca," he'd whispered. "Marcus has instructions. Wait and watch." I'd assumed it was the medication talking, but something in his eyes made me wonder. 2 weeks after the will reading, Mom and Dad invited me to dinner. They waited until dessert to broach the subject. "We've been thinking about the inheritance," Dad began, exchanging glances with Mom. "Megan has this amazing opportunity with her wellness center. The property she wants to lease requires a substantial deposit, plus renovations. We know your portion of the inheritance would make a huge difference," Mom continued, sliding a brochure across the table showing a renovated warehouse space with "Enlighten Wellness" photoshopped across the entrance. "You're already established in your career, and Megan really needs this chance to succeed." "What exactly are you asking?" I said, though I already knew. "We'd like you to consider signing over your inheritance to help your sister," Dad said. "We'd make sure you'd get something back once the business takes off." I maintained a neutral expression, remembering all the previous loans to Megan that were never repaid, all the sacrifices that were expected of me throughout our lives. "I'll think about it," I replied, knowing they interpreted my non-confrontational nature as eventual compliance. The following week, Marcus Rivera called me into his office for what he described as additional paperwork. When I arrived, his secretary showed me to a private conference room where Marcus waited with a sealed envelope. "Your grandfather left specific instructions that this was to be delivered to you alone 3 months after his passing," he explained, sliding the envelope across the polished table. He was quite adamant about the timing and confidentiality. Inside was a letter and a separate legal document. As I read Grandpa's familiar handwriting, my hands began to tremble. The email from my mother confirming they were allocating my inheritance to Megan arrived exactly 1 week after I'd received Grandpa Harold's secret letter. I sat in my office at Riverfront Financial, staring at my computer screen in disbelief. They hadn't even waited for my answer. They'd simply assumed I would comply, as I always had. The email continued with details about how they'd already put a deposit down on the warehouse space for Megan's wellness center. "We used some of our portion as well, but mostly yours since you don't have immediate plans for it. Megan is so excited. She's already ordered custom light fixtures from Scandinavia and hired a feng shui consultant." I closed my laptop and walked to the window overlooking the Willamette River. Rain pattered against the glass, mirroring the storm building inside me. My phone buzzed with a text from Megan. "Thank you so much for believing in me. You should totally get free memberships for..." Life! Love you, sis! That evening, I met Nathan Chen, my colleague and friend at River City Brewing. They just took it, I said, nursing a craft IPA. No real discussion. They've always seen me as the responsible one who doesn't need anything, while Megan is the special one who deserves everything. Nathan studied me carefully. What are you going to do? For the first time, I allowed myself a small smile. Something that would make my grandfather very proud. I returned to my apartment and removed the documents from my safe. Grandpa. Harold had suspected this might happen. He'd watched for decades as my parents consistently prioritized Megan, and he'd left me with a contingency plan, one that would change everything. The next morning, I called Marcus Rivera. "It's time," I said simply. "Are you certain?" he asked. "Once we proceed, there's no turning back." "I'm certain. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story." They've made their decision, and now I'm making mine. 3 days later, my parents called a family meeting at their home to discuss the exciting progress on Megan's wellness center. Megan had created elaborate vision boards showing meditation, rooms, juice bars, and treatment spaces. Tyler, her latest boyfriend, a wellness architect with no actual architectural credentials, pointed out features on digital renderings. "We've already ordered the custom reception desk," Megan gushed, showing pictures on her iPad, "and we're interviewing crystal healers next week." I remained quiet throughout the presentation, waiting for the right moment. Finally, as they began, discussing the grand opening timeline, I cleared my throat. "There's something you should know," I said, my voice steadier than I'd expected. "About Grandpa Harold's estate." Dad waved dismissively. "We've already sorted all that, Becca. The funds are being transferred tomorrow." "Actually, no," I replied, removing a folder from my bag. "They're not." The silence that followed my statement was profound. Megan stopped mid-sentence about aura photography, her mouth slightly open. "What do you mean, no?" Dad asked, his voice betraying confusion rather than anger. In their world, I didn't say no. I placed the document on the coffee table. Grandpa Harold left a secondary will, a codicil that was to be revealed only after 3 months had passed following the initial will reading. "That's ridiculous," Mom scoffed. "We were there when Marcus read everything." "Marcus was following Grandpa's explicit instructions," I explained, keeping my voice even. Grandpa suspected that certain patterns might repeat themselves when it came to the distribution of his assets. "What patterns?" Megan demanded, her cheeks flushing. I met her eyes directly. "The pattern where you receive opportunities at my expense." Dad reached for the document, scanning it with increasingly alarmed eyes. "This can't be legal." "It's completely legal," I assured him. Marcus Rivera has confirmed it. Grandpa's codicil states that if any attempt is made to redistribute my portion of the inheritance to Megan before a period of 5 years has passed, an alternate distribution plan takes effect immediately. "What alternate plan?" Mom asked, her voice suddenly small. "The farmhouse property and all associated assets transfer solely to me, with the exception of personal mementos designated for family members. Additionally, there's a trust that can only be accessed for education or legitimate business ventures that show a profit for 2 consecutive quarters." "He can't do that!" Megan cried, tears already forming. "It's not fair!" "Grandpa made his wishes very clear," I continued, pulling out another document. "He also left a letter explaining his reasoning." I began to read. "To my family. I've watched over the years as patterns emerged in how you treat my granddaughters. While Megan has received endless support for her various endeavors, Rebecca has been expected to stand on her own, receiving little recognition for her achievements and stability. This imbalance stops with my passing. Rebecca has demonstrated financial responsibility, commitment, and the kind of quiet determination I value. If you attempt to continue this pattern with my legacy, then my assets will flow to the person who has earned my trust through actions rather than expectations. The room fell silent, except for Megan's quiet sobbing. Tyler looked uncomfortable, suddenly very interested in his phone. Dad's face had gone pale, while Mom seemed frozen in disbelief. "Becca," Dad finally said, "surely you don't intend to enforce this? We're family." "Yes, we are family," I agreed. "And family should treat each member with equal consideration and respect. Something I haven't experienced for most of my life. This is about more than money," I continued. "This is about recognition, about acknowledging that my stability and responsibility aren't character flaws to be exploited, but strengths to be respected." Megan wiped her eyes, smearing expensive mascara. "So you're just going to take everything? Ruin my dreams out of spite?" I shook my head. "No. I'm going to honor Grandpa's wishes and ensure his legacy isn't squandered on another doomed venture. The trust he established can fund legitimate business opportunities, if they're sustainable. You just have to prove it first, not rely on blind faith and family pressure." "We've already committed to the wellness center location," Dad said weakly. "We signed papers based on accessing your inheritance portion." "That was premature," I replied, gathering my documents, "and not my responsibility to fix." As I stood to leave, I paused. "Marcus will be in touch tomorrow with the formal paperwork. I suggest you all take the evening to reconsider how we've functioned as a family and whether that's really served any of us well in the long run." The stunned expressions on their faces as I walked out the door carried me through the rainy evening with unexpected lightness. For the first time in my adult life, I had disrupted the established order, and it felt like justice. Over the next week, I worked closely with Marcus Rivera to execute Grandpa Harold's wishes. The farmhouse property transfer was straightforward, but the establishment of the family trust required careful consideration. "Your grandfather was very specific about the terms," Marcus explained as we sat in his office reviewing documents. "The trust can fund education or business ventures, but only after proper business plans are submitted and approved by the trustee." "And the trustee is?" I asked, though I suspected the answer. "You," Marcus confirmed. "Harold was adamant that you would have the financial acumen to evaluate proposals objectively." I nodded, feeling the weight of the responsibility. "I want to be fair, Marcus. This isn't about punishing my family. It's about changing destructive patterns." "That's precisely what Harold hoped for," he replied, sliding another folder across his desk. "He also left you this, his personal journal from the last 5 years. He thought it might help you understand his decision better." That evening, I sat on my apartment balcony overlooking the city lights, reading my grandfather's thoughts. His observations were gentle but perceptive. Notes about family gatherings where my accomplishments went unmentioned, financial assistance provided to Megan that was never acknowledged, and his growing concern about the imbalance. One entry particularly struck me. "Watched Thomas and Karen today with the girls. Becca announced her promotion, and they barely paused before turning to Megan's new juice bar idea. Later, I overheard Becca on the phone securing a loan for her parents to cover their property taxes, the 3rd time this year. They don't see her value, but I do. Strength isn't always loud." My phone had been notably silent since the revelation about the codicil. No calls from Mom or Dad, nothing from Megan except a single dramatic text declaring I had destroyed her future. I wasn't surprised. Our family pattern had always been avoidance rather than confrontation. While I waited for the inevitable family response, I began making my own plans. I toured the farmhouse property with a contractor, assessing what maintenance would be needed. The 15-acre parcel with its orchards, outbuildings, and views of Mount Hood had significant potential, not just as a residence, but possibly as a boutique agritourism destination. I also consulted with senior partners at my firm about my long-held dream of establishing an advisory practice focused on helping women achieve financial independence. The inheritance would provide the capital I needed to launch without taking on partners or significant debt. "You've been planning this for years," my colleague Nathan observed as we reviewed potential office spaces. "But you never mentioned the possibility of having startup capital." "I never counted on anything being given to me," I replied. "That's not how things worked in my family." Nathan paused, choosing his words carefully. "Have you considered that might be why you've achieved what you have? Because you never expected help?" His question stayed with me as I drove back to my apartment. Had the years of self-reliance actually made me stronger? Perhaps, but that didn't justify the disparate treatment. Independence forged through necessity wasn't the same as independence supported by equal opportunity. On day 9 after the revelation, Eleanor Dawson, a longtime family friend, called me. "Your mother is absolutely distraught, Becca," she began without preamble. "She hasn't left the house in days." "I'm sorry to hear that," I responded carefully. "Surely there's some compromise, some way to help your sister without all this. Legal unpleasantness?" I'd anticipated this, the family enlisting allies to apply pressure. "Eleanor, this situation developed because my parents made decisions about my inheritance without my consent. There's a straightforward path forward. Everyone respects the legal boundaries Grandpa established, and we work within those parameters. But families share, Becca. They sacrifice for each other." Her tone carried the weight of generational expectations. "Yes, they do," I agreed. "But that sacrifice should be reciprocal and freely given, not assumed or demanded from only one member." After ending the call, I received a notification that someone was at the door of my building. The security camera showed my father, looking uncharacteristically disheveled. When I opened my apartment door, Dad stood with his hands in his pockets, looking older than I'd ever seen him. His normally confident posture was diminished, his shoulders slightly hunched. "Can I come in?" he asked, his voice rough. I stepped aside, gesturing to my small living room. He gazed around as if seeing it for the first time, though he'd visited occasionally over the 3 years I'd lived there. "Nice place," he commented awkwardly. "Seems cozy." "Thank you," I replied, offering him coffee, which he declined. After an uncomfortable silence, he cleared his throat. "Becca, we need to talk about this situation. Your mother is beside herself, and Megan is devastated." "I imagine this has been quite a shock," I said neutrally. He ran, a hand through his graying hair. "The thing is, we've already committed funds we don't have. The deposit on the wellness center space, the custom orders Megan placed. We're legally bound to these expenses now." "Based on assumptions about my inheritance," I noted. Dad leaned forward. "Look, I understand you're upset that we moved forward without explicit permission, but surely you can see this is an overreaction. Harold would never have wanted to cause this kind of family rift." "Actually, Grandpa was very clear about his intentions," I countered, retrieving his journal. "He saw patterns in our family that troubled him deeply. Patterns I've lived with my entire life." "What patterns?" "We've always treated you girls equally." I couldn't help the short laugh that escaped. "Dad, you remortgaged your home 3 times for Megan's ventures. Meanwhile, I've been helping you cover property taxes and insurance premiums for years. Equality has never been part of our family equation." His face flushed. "That's different. Megan needed those opportunities to find her path. You've always been self-sufficient." "Because I had to be," I said quietly. "Not because it was my preference." Dad stood suddenly, pacing my small living room. "I don't understand why you're being so difficult. This wellness center could be Megan's big break. She's found her passion this time." "Just like the dance studio was her passion?" And the food truck? And the lifestyle brand? I kept my voice even, despite the frustration building. Each funded with family resources that disappeared without accountability. Those were learning experiences. Expensive ones, I noted. And now you expect me to fund another. Dad's expression shifted to what I recognized as his negotiation face, the one he used when he thought he could still salvage a situation. What if we compromise? You release half your inheritance portion. Megan scales back the wellness center plans. Everyone gets something. For a moment, I felt the familiar pull to acquiesce, to be the reasonable one, the accommodating daughter. The path of least resistance beckoned with its promise of family peace. I need to think about it, I said finally. Dad left visibly relieved, clearly believing he'd made progress. On his way out, he patted my shoulder. That's my sensible girl. I knew you'd come around. After he left, I sat in silence for a long time, wrestling with doubts. Was I being too harsh? Too unbending? Then I opened Grandpa Harold's journal again, finding an entry from just 2 months before his passing. Spoke with Thomas today about his retirement plans. He admitted they've depleted most of their savings funding Megan's ventures. When I asked about their safety net, he said, "There's always Becca." As if her stability is a resource to be tapped rather than an achievement to be celebrated. They don't see how this imbalance harms both girls. One never learning consequences, the other never receiving recognition. The next morning, I received a group text from Megan with Mom and Dad included. Great news! We found ways to reduce the wellness center budget while keeping the essential vision intact. Dad said you're considering helping with a portion of, so, your inheritance, thank you. Working on updated projections now. This means everything to me. Attached were photos of her and Tyler at the warehouse space, already measuring for equipment placement. They were proceeding as if my agreement was a certainty, reverting to the established family dynamic where my compliance was assumed. Nothing had changed. They'd learned nothing from this situation. I called Marcus. They think I'm going to compromise, I said without preamble. They're already moving forward with modified plans for the wellness center, assuming I'll provide funding. And will you? He asked carefully. I thought of all the years of being the dependable daughter, the reliable sister, the one who quietly achieved while watching resources flow elsewhere. I thought of Grandpa Harold's observations and his final gift to me, not just financial assets, but the opportunity to reclaim my value. No, I said firmly. Proceed with the full implementation of the codicil. No compromises, no exceptions. Very well, Marcus replied. I'll have the final paperwork ready tomorrow. And Rebecca? Your grandfather would be proud. The certified letters were delivered simultaneously to my parents' home and to Megan's apartment on Thursday morning. Marcus had suggested this approach to prevent any claim that one family member had been informed before others. I was conducting a client meeting when the calls began. First Mom, then Dad, then Megan in rapid succession. I let them go to voicemail, focusing on the elderly couple across from me who were planning their retirement. Only after providing them with thorough, attentive service did I step into my private office to deal with the family crisis. Mom's message was tearful. Becca, please call us immediately. These papers, there must be some mistake. Marcus Rivera is saying the farmhouse and everything. It's already yours? That can't be right. Dad sounded angry. Rebecca, we need to talk now. This is completely unacceptable. Call me back immediately. Megan's was predictably dramatic. How could you do this to me? To us? I'm literally having a panic attack right now. Tyler says this is financial abuse. My therapist thinks you're working through childhood jealousy issues. You need to fix this. I took a deep breath and called Marcus first. The letters were delivered? Yes, and properly received, he confirmed. The property transfer was officially recorded this morning. The trust documentation was included in the packets. You are now the sole owner of the Hood River property and trustee of the Wilson Family Educational and Business Development Trust. Next, I texted my family. I received your messages. I'm at work until 6 p.m. I'll meet you at River City Brewing at 7 p.m. to discuss next steps. A public meeting place was strategic. It would minimize the potential for emotional scenes while allowing for necessary conversation. I arrived early, securing a quiet booth in the back where we would have privacy without complete isolation. My parents arrived first, both looking shell-shocked. Mom's eyes were red-rimmed, Dad's jaw set in a tight line. Megan swept in 10 minutes late, making an entrance in oversized sunglasses despite the evening hour. "Thank you for coming," I began once drinks had been ordered. "I understand today's documents came as a shock." "A shock?" Megan hissed, removing her sunglasses to reveal smeared makeup. "You've stolen my future." "That's enough, Megan," Dad said sharply, surprising me. He turned to me with a measured expression. "Becca, we've had some time to review the paperwork. While we're disappointed with how this has unfolded, it appears your grandfather's wishes were quite specific." "Yes, they were," I confirmed. Grandpa Harold was concerned about family, patterns that he felt were destructive to all of us. "But why didn't he just say something while he was alive?" Mom asked, dabbing at her eyes with a napkin. "He tried in his way," I explained. But he also recognized that some patterns are too entrenched to address directly. Sometimes a structural change is needed. "So what happens now?" Dad asked, his businessman persona reasserting itself. "We've committed to expenses we can't cover without access to that inheritance." I took a folder from my bag. "I've prepared some options for moving forward. First, regarding the wellness center. The deposit can be reclaimed if you cancel within 30 days minus a 10% fee. I've confirmed this with the property management company." Megan gasped. "You went behind our backs?" "I did my due diligence," I corrected her. "Something that should have happened before commitments were made." I continued. "Second, regarding the family home. The current mortgage is underwater due to the multiple refinancings. I propose using a portion of the trust to pay off that mortgage, securing your retirement housing, on the condition that no further loans are taken against the property." My parents exchanged glances. "You would do that?" Mom asked hesitantly. "The trust is designed to support family stability," I explained, "but with conditions that prevent the patterns that got us here." I turned to Megan. "Third, regarding your business aspirations. The trust can fund legitimate ventures, but only after a proper business plan is developed, vetted by independent advisors, and you complete a basic business administration course. So I have to pass your tests to access what should have been mine anyway?" Megan's voice was bitter. "You need to demonstrate viability before accessing funds that have been repeatedly lost on impulsive ventures," I corrected. "These aren't punitive measures. They're guardrails to help you succeed." "This is still about you controlling everything," Megan accused, tears forming again. I met her gaze steadily. "No, it's about establishing accountability where there has been none. About recognizing that real support isn't just writing blank checks. It's requiring growth and responsibility." "And if we refuse these terms?" Dad asked, though his tone suggested he already knew the answer. "Then the codicil stands as written. The property and assets remain solely mine, and the trust remains under my management with its current restrictions." I closed my folder. "But I hope you'll see this as an opportunity for our family to develop healthier patterns." Dad nodded slowly, the businessman in him recognizing when he was in a weakened negotiating position. Mom looked down at her untouched wine. Megan stood abruptly. "This is bullshit," she declared, grabbing her designer purse. "I don't have to sit here and be lectured about responsibility by my control-freak sister. When my wellness center makes millions, you'll regret treating me this way." As she stormed out, Tyler trailing behind her, I felt a curious mixture of sadness and relief. The confrontation I'd avoided my entire life had finally happened, and I was still standing. "She'll calm down eventually," Dad said, signaling for the check. "In the meantime, we should review these proposals more carefully." "Take your time," I replied, standing to leave. "The terms aren't negotiable, but I'm happy to clarify any points. This isn't about punishment. It's about changing how we function as a family." As I walked to my car, my phone buzzed with a text from Nathan. "How did it go?" "About as expected," I replied. But for the first time, I set the terms. The week following our meeting at River City Brewing was eerily quiet. My parents retreated into silence, while Megan launched a passive-aggressive social media campaign with vague posts about toxic family dynamics and healing from betrayal. I continued my daily routine, focusing on my clients and beginning renovations on the farmhouse. The contractor I'd hired, a weather-beaten man named Jim who'd known my grandfather, walked with me through the property on Saturday morning. "Harold kept this place up pretty good, considering his age," he observed as we inspected the barn. "Roof's solid, foundations decent, mostly cosmetic work needed in the main house." I ran my hand along the worn wooden posts, feeling a connection to my grandfather. I want to preserve as much of the original character as possible. This place meant a lot to him. "Meant a lot to you too, I reckon," Jim said perceptively. "Used to see you out here helping him when no one else bothered." The first crack in the family's resistance came 10 days after our meeting. Dad called on a Tuesday evening, his voice carefully neutral. "Your mother and I have reviewed your proposal regarding the mortgage. We would like to accept those terms." "I'm glad to hear that," I replied. After an awkward pause, he added, "The bank has given us notice about the wellness center loan we took out. Without the inheritance funds, we're in default." I had anticipated this. "Send me the paperwork. The trust can address the immediate liability if you and Megan agree to the conditions we discussed." "Megan is still processing everything," he said delicately. Translation: Megan was refusing to accept any solution that required her to demonstrate accountability. "The offer stands when she's ready," I replied firmly. 3 days later, Mom appeared at my office without an appointment. My assistant showed her in, looking apologetic. "Your mother insists it's urgent." Mom sat opposite my desk, taking in my professional environment with surprise. My corner office, with its view of the river and walls lined with credentials and awards, seemed to challenge her perception of her sensible daughter. "I had no idea your position was so senior," she said, noting the nameplate on my desk. That read, "Rebecca Wilson, Senior Financial Advisor." "There's a lot you don't know about my career," I observed. "How can I help you today?" She fidgeted with her purse. "It's Megan. She's not handling this well. She's talking about moving to Bali permanently, saying there's nothing for her here anymore." "That would be her choice to make," I replied, keeping my expression neutral. "Becca, please, can't you see what this is doing to our family? Your father barely sleeps. I'm on anxiety medication. Megan refuses to come to the house because she says it's tainted by betrayal." "We were happy before all this." I leaned forward. "Were we, Mom? Or was there an imbalance that seemed normal because we'd all accepted our assigned roles? Dad? And you as Megan's champions, me as the self-sufficient one who needed nothing, and Megan as the creative spirit who required endless support?" Mom's eyes welled with tears. "We never meant to make you feel less important." "I know," I said gently, "but impact matters more than intention." For years, I watched as family resources flowed toward Megan's dreams while I built my life without support or recognition. "You seemed fine on your own," she protested weakly. "I was managing," I corrected her. "But wouldn't it have been nice to have the same encouragement? The same belief in my potential?" Mom dabbed at her eyes. What do you want from us, Becca? To say we were wrong? That we favored Megan? Fine, we did. But this punishment seems so extreme. This isn't punishment, I explained patiently. It's correction, a rebalancing. Grandpa Harold saw what was happening and provided a solution that forces us all to reconsider how we function as a family. By giving you all the power? No. By giving me equal consideration, something that's been missing. The trust isn't about power. It's about establishing healthy parameters for support. Mom stood to leave, her expression resigned. Your father and I will sign the mortgage paperwork. But Megan, I don't know if she'll ever accept this. After she left, I sat quietly, processing the conversation. This was the hardest part, holding firm while watching my family struggle with a new reality they hadn't chosen, but necessary. Change was rarely comfortable. The following Sunday, I drove to the farmhouse to meet with the contractor about renovation plans. The property looked different now that it was mine, not just a place of memories, but a canvas for my future. As I walked through the orchard where Grandpa Harold and I had picked apples together, my phone buzzed with a text from Marcus. Megan just called my office. She wants to meet about the trust conditions. Progress, perhaps. I called her immediately. I'm not agreeing to anything, Megan said before I could even greet her. I just want to understand exactly what these ridiculous conditions entail. We can meet tomorrow, I offered. My office or a public place, whichever you prefer. Not your office, she replied quickly. I'm not coming to you like some supplicant. The coffee shop near my apartment, 11 o'clock. I arrived at the artisanal coffee shop in Megan's trendy neighborhood precisely at 11. She was already there, occupying a corner table, wearing oversized sunglasses despite the cloudy day. Tyler sat beside her, his expression a practiced blend of supportive outrage. Thank you for meeting, I said, setting my briefcase on an empty chair. Megan removed her sunglasses with a theatrical gesture. Let's be clear, I'm only here because Mom is having anxiety attacks, and Dad looks like he aged 10 years in the last 2 weeks. What exactly are these conditions I need to meet to access what should have been rightfully mine? I opened my briefcase and removed a folder. The trust established by Grandpa Harold has specific parameters for educational and business funding. For business ventures, the requirements include completion of a basic business administration course, submission of a comprehensive business plan vetted by independent advisors, and a demonstration of market research supporting the venture's viability. So I need your permission to use my own inheritance, she said bitterly. You need to demonstrate commitment and planning before accessing funds from the trust, I corrected. These aren't arbitrary hurdles, Megan. They're safeguards to ensure resources aren't wasted on impulsive ventures. Tyler leaned forward. As Megan's business partner and life coach, I find these stipulations inherently negative. They stifle creativity and spontaneity, which are Megan's greatest gifts to the world. I regarded him steadily. Creativity and sound business practices aren't mutually exclusive. In fact, the most successful creative ventures are built on solid foundations. That's such a conventional mindset, Megan scoffed. Disruptive innovations don't come from playing it safe and following rules. True innovation also doesn't come from repeating patterns that have failed multiple times, I countered. The dance studio, the food truck, the lifestyle brand, each followed the same trajectory: enthusiastic beginning, chaotic execution, abandonment when challenges arose. Megan's cheeks flushed. Those were learning experiences. Expensive ones, I noted. And what did you learn from them? She fell silent, her expression shifting from indignation to something less certain. After a moment, she asked reluctantly, "What kind of business course are we talking about?" Progress, indeed. Portland Community College offers an excellent small business management certificate, 3 months, practical focus, taught by people who've actually built successful companies. Community college? Megan looked horrified. I have a degree from Evergreen State. In expressive movement. Studies, I reminded her gently. This would provide complementary knowledge specifically related to business operations. Tyler placed a protective arm around Megan's shoulders. Baby, you don't need this. There are investors who would recognize your vision without all these hoops. I closed my folder. That's certainly an option. The trust conditions aren't mandatory. They're simply prerequisites for accessing those particular funds. Megan stared into her untouched matcha latte. And if I refuse? Then nothing changes. The property remains mine, and the trust remains under my management with its current restrictions. After a long silence, Megan abruptly stood. I need to think about this. She grabbed her designer bag and strode toward the door, Tyler hurrying after her. But she paused at the exit, turning back without quite meeting my eyes. The business course, does it have to be in person, or do they offer it online? And tiny crack in the armor. Both options are available. I can send you the link. She nodded once before disappearing into the street. That evening, I received a surprising call from Dad. Your mother and I signed the mortgage paperwork, he began without preamble. Marcus says the trust will handle the payment to the bank next week. That's good, I replied, sensing there was more. Megan told us about your meeting, he continued, his voice careful. She said you suggested some kind of business course. As one of the conditions for accessing trust funds, yes. A pause, then, she's considering it. I felt a small flicker of hope. That would be a positive step. The thing is, Dad said, his voice softening, she's worried about looking foolish, that she won't understand the material, or that people will judge her for her previous failures. For the first time, I felt a genuine wave of sympathy for my sister. Behind the bravado and entitlement lay insecurity, perhaps even awareness that her pattern wasn't working. The course is designed for beginners, I assured him. Many participants are starting fresh or rebuilding after setbacks. There's no shame in learning. Another pause. Would you be willing to help her with it? Not do it for her, he added quickly. But maybe review things she doesn't understand? She'd never ask you directly, but I think it would make a difference. The request surprised me. Not just the suggestion that Megan might need my help, but that Dad was acknowledging it. Yes, I said after consideration. I'd be willing to support her efforts, as long as she's genuinely trying. 2 days later, Megan sent me a screenshot of her enrollment confirmation for the online small business management certificate. No message accompanied it, just the evidence that she'd taken the first step. I responded simply, "Good choice. Let me know if you have questions as you go through the modules." A week passed before I heard from her again. A text arrived late one evening. The accounting section is impossible. Who cares about the difference between cash and accrual methods anyway? I smiled at the familiar complaint. It matters when you're trying to understand your actual financial position versus outstanding obligations, I texted back. I can walk you through it over coffee if you want. 3 dots appeared, disappeared, then reappeared. Finally. Fine. Tomorrow? Same. Place, 4 p.m.? Our meeting the next day was awkward at first, but as I explained accounting concepts using examples relevant to her wellness center idea, Megan's resistance gradually softened. She asked questions, took notes, and even acknowledged where her previous ventures had suffered from poor financial tracking. I just always thought the creative vision was the important part, she admitted, sketching a notebook margin with geometric patterns. The numbers seemed like something that would work themselves out if the concept was good enough. That's a common misconception, I said. But the best creative ventures succeed because they're built on sustainable business models. The numbers are just tools to protect and nurture the vision. She looked up, studying me with new awareness. You're actually good at explaining this stuff. I always thought you were just rigid. I'm methodical, I corrected. There's a difference. Maybe. She hesitated, then asked, "Did you really think all my ideas were terrible?" "Not at all," I replied honestly. "Your concepts have always been creative and timely. It's the execution that's been problematic. Jumping in without planning, making expensive commitments before testing demand, abandoning ship when the initial excitement fades." Megan was quiet for a moment, absorbing this. "Grandpa used to say something similar. He'd tell me I had champagne ideas with beer follow-through." I smiled at the familiar phrase. He had a way with words. "He also said you were like him, steady, observant, that you built things to last." She traced the rim of her coffee cup. "I always thought he meant it as a kind of backhanded compliment. Boring but reliable." "I never took it that way," I said. "He valued persistence. So do I." Megan gathered her materials, looking uncertain. "I should go, but thanks for explaining the accounting stuff." It was a small moment, but it felt like the first genuine exchange we'd had in years. Over the next several weeks, a new pattern emerged. Megan would text me questions about her coursework, sometimes legitimately confusing concepts, sometimes thinly veiled excuses to continue our conversations. I responded with explanations, examples, and occasional gentle challenges to her assumptions. Meanwhile, renovations on the farmhouse progressed. I focused on preserving the character Grandpa Harold had loved while updating systems and creating a comfortable living space. Each weekend, I drove out to check progress and make decisions, finding unexpected peace in planning a home that reflected my values rather than conforming to others' expectations. One Saturday in early summer, I arrived to find a familiar car, parked in the gravel driveway, Mom's blue sedan. I found her on the back porch, gazing out at the orchards. "The contractor let me in," she explained as I joined her. "I hope that's okay." "Of course," I replied, surprised but not displeased. "What brings you out here?" She gestured to the rolling hills beyond the property. "Memories, I suppose. Dad and I used to bring you girls here for apple picking every fall. You'd always insist on climbing the tallest trees to find the perfect apples." "I remember," I said, smiling. Megan would decorate hers with markers and ribbons when we got home. Mom nodded, her expression softening. "You were so different, even then. But we should have seen your strengths for what they were, not just convenient traits that made our lives easier." The admission caught me off guard. "What do you mean?" "You were independent, responsible. We came to expect those qualities, to depend on them, without really valuing them." She turned to face me directly. "Without really seeing you, Becca. And I'm sorry for that." The apology, simple but profound, hung in the air between us. "Thank you," I said finally. "That means a lot. Your father and I have been doing some hard thinking these past weeks, about patterns, like you said." She looked back toward the orchard. "Harold tried to tell us, in his way. We just weren't listening." "Grandpa understood people," I observed. "He saw things others missed." "Including how special you are," Mom agreed. "Not just reliable, but visionary in your own quiet way." She gestured toward the farmhouse. "The renovations look wonderful, by the way. Respectful of the history, but fresh." "That was the goal," I said, pleased she'd noticed. Mom hesitated, then added, "Megan mentioned you've been helping her with her coursework." "Just clarifying concepts when needed," I explained, not wanting to overstate my involvement. Still, it means something that she's asking for help at all. That's new for her. Mom smiled faintly. She's actually sticking with something for once. The course, I mean. She studies every day. I'm glad to hear that. As the afternoon light began to fade, Mom gathered her purse. I should get back. Your father's making dinner tonight. Another new development. Apparently men can cook after retirement. Who knew? I walked her to her car, feeling a subtle shift in our relationship. Not dramatic reconciliation, but the beginnings of mutual respect. The family dinner on Sunday, she said as she opened her car door. I know things have been strained, but we'd really like you to come, if you're comfortable with that. The weekly family dinner had been a tradition I'd gradually stopped attending as tensions grew. I'll be there, I promised. Sunday dinner proved less awkward than I'd feared. Dad grilled salmon on the back deck, proudly explaining his marinade recipe. Mom prepared a salad with ingredients from her newly planted garden. Megan arrived last, bringing store-bought dessert but making self-deprecating jokes about her culinary limitations rather than defensive excuses. The conversation remained carefully neutral at first. Neighborhood news, a movie Dad had enjoyed, the unusually warm weather. But as dinner progressed, Megan tentatively mentioned her business course. We're working on market analysis this week, she explained, surprising me with her animated interest. I've been researching wellness centers in the Pacific Northwest, looking at what services succeed and which ones underperform. That sounds thorough, I commented, genuinely impressed. I realized I've been assuming what people want based on my preferences, Megan continued, instead of actually investigating market needs. For instance, meditation spaces are popular but don't generate much revenue. Specialized fitness classes and personalized nutrition counseling have better profit margins. Dad looked between us with a bemused expression. I hardly recognize you two having a civil conversation about business strategy. Megan rolled her eyes, but without real annoyance. Turns out Becca's not completely awful to talk to when I actually listen. High praise indeed, I said dryly, but with a smile, to soften the words. As dessert was served, Mom broached the subject we'd all been avoiding. Marcus says the trust payment cleared the mortgage. We received confirmation from the bank yesterday. Good, I nodded. That provides stability moving forward. It's more than that, Dad said quietly. It's a fresh start. One we didn't deserve but appreciated nonetheless. The acknowledgement hung in the air, significant in its humility. I've been thinking, Megan said suddenly, setting down her fork, about the wellness center concept. I still believe in it, but I'm reconsidering the approach. In what way? I asked, curious. Instead of leasing that enormous warehouse space, I'm looking at a smaller location to start, focusing on services proven to generate revenue, building a client base before expanding. She looked at me almost defiantly, as though expecting criticism. Instead, I nodded approvingly. That's a much more sustainable approach. Reducing initial overhead gives you runway to establish proof of concept. Exactly. Her face lit with unexpected pleasure at my validation. And I've been talking to existing wellness practitioners about partnership models instead of trying to do everything myself. Smart, I agreed. Leveraging established expertise while you build your own systems. For the next hour, Megan outlined her revised business concept while I asked clarifying questions and offered constructive suggestions. Our parents watched with expressions shifting from surprise to something like wonder at the collaborative exchange. As the evening wound down, Dad disappeared into his study, returning with a bottle of aged scotch Grandpa Harold had given him years ago. I think this occasion calls for a proper toast, he said, pouring small measures into 4 glasses. He raised his glass, looking at each of us in turn. To new beginnings, to listening better and assuming less, to Harold's wisdom in knowing we needed to change, even when we couldn't see it ourselves. We clinked glasses, the moment surprisingly free of tension or resentment. Something had shifted, not dramatic reconciliation, but the first tentative, steps toward a healthier family dynamic. As I drove home that night, I reflected on how differently the evening had unfolded from what I might have predicted weeks earlier. The resentment wasn't entirely gone, the patterns not completely broken, but change had begun. Real change born of necessity rather than good intentions alone. The following week brought another development. I received an email from Megan, with a subject line that immediately caught my attention. Business Plan Draft 1. Feedback requested. The attached document shocked me, not just with its existence, but its quality. 40 pages of thoughtful analysis, realistic financial projections, phased implementation strategies, and contingency plans. The concept had evolved from a vague wellness center to a specific integrated health coaching practice with clear service offerings and target demographics. I spent an evening reviewing it, making notes and suggestions in the margins. Despite myself, I found the concept compelling. Megan had identified an underserved niche in the Portland market and developed services that played to her genuine strengths while addressing her previous weaknesses through strategic partnerships. I called her the next morning. "I've reviewed your business plan," I began. "And?" Her voice betrayed anxiety beneath the attempted nonchalance. "It's impressive, Megan. Truly. You've put serious thought and research into this." Her sigh of relief was audible. "I've been working on it for weeks. I must have rewritten the executive summary 20 times. "It shows," I assured her. "I've made some notes and suggestions, but the core concept is solid. Have you considered who else should review it? The trust requires independent evaluation." "I thought maybe Nathan from your firm," she suggested. "You've mentioned him before, and maybe someone from the Small Business Development Center?" Her thoughtfulness in these suggestions, seeking qualified feedback rather than cheerleading, indicated how much she'd grown in recent weeks. "Both excellent choices," I agreed. "I'll connect you with Nathan, and the SBDC offers free consultations for exactly this purpose." "Thank you," she said, then added hesitantly, "I've been thinking about the farmhouse too." "Oh?" I wasn't sure where this was heading. "The orchard. It's organic, right? Grandpa never used chemicals." "Right," I confirmed. "He was organic before it was fashionable. Would you consider, would it make sense to incorporate the orchard products into the wellness concept? Seasonal retreats at the property, farm-to-treatment ingredients for the skincare services?" The question came in a rush, as though she'd been rehearsing it. The suggestion caught me by surprise, not because it was flawed, but because it was inspired. The property's natural beauty and established orchards could indeed complement her wellness concept perfectly. "That's actually brilliant, Megan," I said, genuinely impressed. "Vertical integration with an authentic story behind it. We'd need to work out the details, but conceptually, it addresses several needs at once." "We?" she questioned, her voice cautious but hopeful. I hesitated, then made a decision. "If you're serious about this, really committed to building something sustainable, I'd consider a formal partnership arrangement. Your wellness expertise and client relationships, my financial and operational experience, and the property's resources." The silence that followed was so long I wondered if we'd been disconnected. Finally, in a voice thick with emotion, Megan asked, "You'd want to work with me? After everything?" "Not because of the past," I clarified, "but because of the potential future. You're doing the work, Megan. You're growing. And this concept, approached correctly, could be something meaningful." Over the following months, what began as tentative reconciliation evolved into something none of us had anticipated, a genuine collaboration. Megan completed her business course with distinction, impressing her instructors with her final project. Nathan and the SBDC consultant both provided favorable reviews of her business plan, with constructive suggestions she implemented thoughtfully. The trust released initial funding for the venture, structured in milestone payments tied to specific achievements rather than a lump sum. Megan accepted these conditions without complaint, recognizing them as safeguards rather than restrictions. We formalized our business partnership with clear agreements about responsibilities and expectations. Megan would lead client services and program development. I would oversee financial management and operations. The farmhouse would serve as our retreat center, with part of the main building converted into treatment rooms and workshop spaces. Dad, retired but restless, revealed unexpected carpentry skills, volunteering to restore the farmhouse's original built-ins and construct custom furnishings for the wellness spaces. Mom discovered a passion for herb gardening, establishing plots of lavender, rosemary, and other therapeutic plants around the property. By autumn, Orchard Wellness had conducted its first weekend retreat, a small affair for friends and family to test our systems and gather feedback. Watching Megan confidently lead a group meditation on the property where we had once picked apples as children, I felt an unexpected sense of rightness, as though Grandpa Harold had somehow foreseen this outcome. He would have loved this, Mom said, joining me on the porch as participants enjoyed fresh apple cider and orchard views. The wellness center? I asked. The harmony, she clarified. The way you both found your strengths and learned to complement each other instead of competing. That evening, after the participants had departed and the cleanup was complete, the four of us gathered around the farmhouse's large kitchen table, the same table where Grandpa Harold had told his stories and shared his wisdom. I have something to confess, Dad said unexpectedly, setting down his tea mug. After Harold's diagnosis, he called me here for a private conversation. He told me about his plans for the estate, including the codicil. You knew? Megan and I asked simultaneously. Dad nodded, looking apologetic. He made me promise not to interfere. He said sometimes people need to face consequences to find their best selves. He looked at Megan with gentle eyes. He believed in your potential, sweetheart, but he saw how our enabling was holding you back. And he saw how we overlooked Becca's contributions, Mom added quietly. At first I was angry with him, Dad continued. I argued that parents should be able to support their children as they see fit. But Harold said something I've been reflecting on ever since. True support isn't giving people what they ask for. It's giving them what they need to become their best selves. Megan reached across the table and, in a gesture that would have been unimaginable months earlier, took my hand. I was so resentful at first, she admitted. I felt betrayed, abandoned. But looking back, continuing on my previous path would have been the real betrayal of my potential, of Grandpa's belief in me. We all had patterns to break, I acknowledged, squeezing her hand. Including me. I needed to learn to speak up, to claim my value rather than quietly resenting being overlooked. And we needed to see both our daughters clearly, Mom said, tears glistening in her eyes. To recognize and celebrate your different strengths rather than taking one for granted while indulging the other. Dad raised his mug in a toast. To Harold's wisdom and to the family we're becoming, not perfect, but growing. As we clinked mugs around the ancient wooden table, I felt Grandpa Harold's presence in the warmth of the kitchen, in the scent of apples from the orchard, in the renewed bonds of our imperfect but healing family. The inheritance he'd left wasn't just property or money. It was the opportunity for transformation, the chance to break destructive patterns and build something healthier in their place. My phone buzzed with a notification. Our first official Orchard Wellness retreat had sold out within hours of opening registration. I showed the screen to Megan, watching her face light up with genuine pride, not the temporary excitement of a new venture, but the deeper satisfaction of earned success. We're really doing this, she said wonderingly. Together, I agreed, just like Grandpa envisioned. Later that night, as I stood on the farmhouse porch watching moonlight silver, the orchard trees, I thought about the journey of the past months. The path hadn't been smooth or simple. There had been difficult conversations, painful realizations, moments of doubt. True change never came easily or without cost. But standing there in the quiet beauty of what was now truly my home, our home in the larger sense, I knew that Grandpa Harold's unconventional approach had given us all something invaluable: the gift of becoming better versions of ourselves, of breaking patterns too entrenched to address through conventional means. My inheritance hadn't just been the property or the funds, but the courage to stand in my truth, to claim my value, to set boundaries without sacrificing connection. Megan's inheritance, paradoxically, had been the opportunity to develop responsibility and depth, to channel her creativity into sustainable structures rather than fleeting enthusiasm. And our parents? Perhaps their inheritance was the chance to see their daughters anew, to recognize how their well-intended but imbalanced approach had limited all of us in different ways. As I turned to go inside, I spotted an old journal on the entry table, Grandpa Harold's handwriting visible on the aged pages. Opening it at random, I found an entry from years earlier. Watched Thomas and Karen with the girls today. Same pattern as always. Megan performs, everyone applauds. Becca achieves, barely a nod. Someday they'll need to see what I see. That Becca's quiet strength is just as worthy of celebration as Megan's sparkle. That Megan needs structure as much as Becca needs recognition. I'm making arrangements, not what they'll expect, but what they truly need. I closed the journal, smiling at my grandfather's foresight. He'd known all along that his most valuable legacy wouldn't be the property or the money, but the chance for his family to break free from limiting patterns, to become something stronger, healthier, and more genuinely connected than we had ever been before. The inheritance that truly mattered had never been about wealth at all, but about wisdom, truth, and the courage to grow beyond comfortable limitations into something more authentic and alive. In that, Grandpa Harold had been more generous than any of us could have imagined. The one-year anniversary of Grandpa Harold's passing approached as winter settled over Hood River. Orchard Wellness had been operating for 5 months, steadily building a reputation for authenticity and quality. Megan had proven herself not just a visionary but a dedicated businesswoman, showing up daily with renewed purpose and discipline. I had discovered unexpected fulfillment in our partnership, my financial expertise finding perfect application in a venture that aligned with my values. On a crisp December morning, I found Megan in the farmhouse kitchen, surrounded by spreadsheets and sample jars of various apple-based skincare products we were developing with a local herbalist. "The projected numbers for next quarter look promising," she said, gesturing to her laptop. "If the winter retreats fill as quickly as the fall ones did, we'll be ahead of projections." I poured myself coffee from the pot she'd brewed, still somewhat amazed by this new, responsible version of my sister. "Nathan reviewed our financials yesterday. He thinks we can start planning the expansion sooner than we anticipated." Megan nodded thoughtfully, making notes. "The guest cottage renovations? That would add 4 more overnight rooms." "Exactly, plus the additional treatment space." I sat across from her, watching as she methodically organized her materials. "You know, sometimes I still can't believe how much has changed in a year." She looked up with a rueful smile. "You mean how I've gone from entitled disaster to actual functional adult?" "That's not how I would have phrased it," I laughed, "but essentially, yes." "I think about it all the time," she admitted, closing her laptop. "How different everything would be if Grandpa hadn't set up that codicil. If I'd gotten my portion of the inheritance without conditions." "What do you think would have happened?" I asked, genuinely curious. She sighed, gazing out the window at the winter bare orchard. "I would have plowed ahead with that absurdly oversized wellness center, spent way too much on Instagram-worthy decor, hired people to do all the actual work, and probably been bankrupt within 18 months. She gave me a sidelong glance. "Am I close?" "Disturbingly accurate," I agreed. "And you? If things had gone according to the original plan?" If Mom and Dad had just taken your portion for my venture without the dramatic reveal of the secret, Will. I considered this. I probably would have retreated further, become more invisible to the family, focused entirely on my career, built more walls. Eventually, I might have moved away, limited contact, protected myself through distance. We would have lost each other, Megan said softly, and ourselves in different ways. The kitchen fell quiet as we both contemplated these alternate paths. I've been thinking about doing something to mark the anniversary, Megan said after a while. Not just for Grandpa, but to acknowledge everything that's changed. Maybe a small gathering here at the farmhouse? Mom, Dad, a few close friends? I think that's a lovely idea, I agreed. And there's something else I wanted to discuss with you. She hesitated, suddenly looking nervous. Tyler and I broke up. This wasn't entirely surprising. Tyler had become increasingly peripheral as Megan grew more focused and self-reliant. His life coaching platitudes had started to ring hollow against her genuine growth. I'm sorry, I offered cautiously, unsure how she felt about this development. Don't be, she said with a dismissive wave. It was a long time coming. He couldn't handle the new me, the one who asks questions, makes plans, considers consequences. She smiled wryly. Apparently, I'm not as spiritually spontaneous as I used to be. His loss, I said firmly. Definitely. She twisted a strand of hair, a habit from childhood that emerged when she was anxious. But it made me realize something important about the farmhouse, about our business arrangement. My stomach tightened. Was she having second thoughts about our partnership? I want to make this official and permanent, she continued, pulling a document from beneath her laptop. I've spoken with Marcus. This transfers half of my trust fund directly to you, unconditionally. No strings, no obligations. I stared at the legal document, confused. Megan, why would you do that? The trust is working well as structured. Because I need you to know I'm committed to this, to us, to what we're building, regardless of any legal requirements. Her eyes held mine, serious and clear. This isn't about obligation anymore. It's about choice. My choice to partner with you because it makes us both stronger. The gesture touched me deeply. I don't need this document to believe in your commitment, I said gently, pushing it back toward her. I see it every day in how you show up, in the work you do, in who you've become. Then consider it symbolic, she insisted. A way of acknowledging that what Grandpa created through necessity, we're continuing by choice. After a moment's consideration, I nodded. We'll talk to Marcus about restructuring the business as equal partners, independent of the trust requirements, but from a place of mutual commitment, not obligation. Megan smiled, relief evident in her expression. That's even better. The memorial gathering was scheduled for a Saturday afternoon in mid-January. Snow dusted the orchard, transforming the farmhouse property into a winter wonderland. Inside, fires crackled in both the living room and kitchen hearths, filling the space, with warmth and fragrant applewood smoke. Mom arrived early to help with preparations, arranging photographs of Grandpa Harold throughout the house, fishing on the Columbia River, tending his beloved orchard, holding Megan and me as toddlers on his lap. Dad followed an hour later, carrying a box of Harold's favorite whiskey and old vinyl records. He would have loved seeing the place like this, Dad commented, looking around at the tastefully renovated farmhouse. Respected but renewed, just like he always wanted. That was the goal, I agreed, accepting his awkward but heartfelt hug, another new development in our evolving relationship. Guests began arriving mid-afternoon, old friends of Grandpa's from the community, Marcus and his wife, Nathan, from my firm, and several of the practitioners who had become part of the Orchard Wellness team. To my surprise, Eleanor Dawson, the family friend who had once tried to pressure me into compromising, arrived with a potted apple sapling. A heritage variety, she explained, handing it to me with genuine warmth. Harold mentioned wanting to add these to the orchard years ago. I thought perhaps you might plant it in his memory. The gesture touched me. That's incredibly thoughtful, Eleanor. Thank you. As guests mingled, sharing stories about Grandpa Harold and enjoying refreshments featuring produce from the orchard, I found myself observing the gathering from a quiet corner. The farmhouse felt alive in a way it hadn't even during Grandpa's time, not just preserved but evolving, a living legacy rather than a static memorial. Dad clinked a glass for attention as the afternoon light began to fade. I'd like to propose a toast. To my father-in-law, Harold Wilson, he announced, raising his whiskey. A man who saw clearly, planned carefully, and loved deeply enough to challenge us when we needed it most. Murmurs of agreement rippled through the gathering. And if I may, Dad continued, his voice growing unexpectedly emotional, I'd like to acknowledge my daughters, Rebecca and Megan. He gestured toward us. Harold always believed in both of you, in your different but equally valuable gifts. He saw what Karen and I were too blind to see. That true family support means recognizing each person's authentic strengths, not just the ones that fit our expectations. Mom stepped forward to join him. We made so many mistakes, she admitted. Frankly. Patterns we couldn't see because they were so familiar. But thanks to Harold's wisdom and Rebecca's courage in enforcing his wishes, we've been given the gift of a second chance. A chance to be the family we could have been all along. Megan moved to stand beside me, linking her arm through mine. To Grandpa Harold, she said, raising her glass. Who knew sometimes the greatest gift is not getting what you want, but what you need? To Harold, echoed the gathering. As the evening progressed and guests gradually departed, a gentle snow began falling, adding to the hushed beauty of the property. Marcus was among the last to leave, lingering in the entry hall with an expression that suggested he had something to share. I've been saving this for the right moment, he said, reaching into his briefcase. Harold left this with specific instructions, that it was to be opened a year after his passing, once everything else had been resolved. He handed me a sealed envelope with all our names written on it in Grandpa's distinctive script. He wanted it read when you were all together. After Marcus departed, we gathered in the living room, Mom, Dad, Megan, and I, staring at the envelope with mingled curiosity and trepidation. You should read it, Becca, Mom said softly. With careful fingers, I broke the seal and unfolded several pages of Grandpa's familiar handwriting. The letter was dated just 1 week before his passing. My dear family, I began, my voice steady despite the emotion rising in my throat. If you're reading this, then a year has passed since I left you, and much has likely changed. I hope the changes have been for the better, though I know the path may not have been easy. Thomas and Karen, my beloved son-in-law and daughter. Please know that the arrangements I made were born not from judgment, but from love, from watching patterns unfold over decades that were limiting all of you in different ways. Sometimes an outside perspective sees what those within cannot. Megan, my bright spark, your creativity and vision have always delighted me. But I feared your gifts were being undermined by indulgence rather than strengthened by challenge. True potential requires both encouragement and accountability to fully flower. I hope you've discovered the satisfaction that comes from seeing a vision through to completion, from building something real and lasting. Rebecca, my quiet strength. You remind me so much of myself at your age. Capable, observant, often underestimated. I worried that your family had come to take your stability for granted, seeing it as a resource to be tapped rather than an achievement to be celebrated. I hope you found your voice and claimed your rightful place, not just as the reliable one, but as a woman of vision and purpose. What I wish for all of you is what any parent or grandparent wishes, that you become your best selves, that you find joy in meaningful work, and that you support each other from a place of respect rather than obligation or habit. The greatest inheritance isn't property or money, but wisdom, the capacity to see clearly, to act with integrity, and to love without limitation. Whatever has unfolded since my passing, know that my deepest hope was for healing, for growth, and for the discovery or rediscovery of the genuine connections that make a family truly strong. With faith in your capacity to grow, and with enduring love, Harold. Silence filled the room as I finished reading. Outside, snow continued to fall, blanketing the world in hushed white. Inside, the weight of Grandpa Harold's words settled around us like a benediction. "He knew," Megan said finally, wiping tears from her cheeks. "He knew exactly what would happen, how we would respond, where we would end up." "Not exactly," I corrected gently. "He hoped. He created conditions that might lead to positive change, but the choices were still ours to make." Dad nodded, his expression thoughtful. "We could have fought it. Challenged. The codicil maintained our old patterns out of spite or habit. Many families would have. But we didn't," Mom said, reaching for his hand. "We listened, eventually." "Better late than never," Megan quipped, but her smile was genuine. I carefully folded the letter and returned it to its envelope. "I think this belongs in a frame. Perhaps here in the farmhouse, where we can all see it when we gather." Later that night, after Mom and Dad had departed for home and Megan had retired to her room in the East Wing, I stood alone on the porch, watching moonlight transform the snow-covered orchard into a landscape of silver and shadow. The property stretched before me, beautiful in its winter dormancy, not dead but resting, gathering strength for the renewal to come. It struck me that families were like orchards in many ways. They required attention and care. They needed both nurturing and occasional pruning. They produced sweetest fruit when each tree was given appropriate space and support for its particular nature. And they were never static, always growing, always changing, always responding to the seasons of life. Grandpa Harold had understood this. His legacy wasn't the farmhouse or the trust fund, but the wisdom to see what his family needed most. Not indulgence, but challenge. Not avoidance, but confrontation. Not comfortable patterns, but necessary disruption. I thought of all that had changed in a year. The shift in family dynamics from imbalance toward equity. Megan's transformation from entitled dreamer to committed businesswoman. My own journey from silent resentment to confident assertion. Our parents' evolution from enabling to encouraging. None of it perfect, all of it ongoing, but moving steadily in a healthier direction. The inheritance that had initially divided us had ultimately united us. Not through its monetary value, but through the wisdom embedded in its conditions, the truth it forced us to confront, and the growth it demanded from each of us. As I turned to go inside, I caught sight of a single apple overlooked at harvest, still clinging to a bare branch. Small but persistent, a reminder of abundance past and promise future. Like that apple, Grandpa Harold's true legacy endured beyond its season, not in possessions or property, but in the lasting imprint of his wisdom on the family he loved. What began as a story of inheritance diverted had become something far more valuable. A family transformed. The long, complex process of becoming what we were always capable of being, but had somehow lost sight of along the way. A journey not of recovery, but of discovery. Of finding what had been there all along beneath layers of habit and expectation. The farmhouse door closed behind me as I stepped into warmth and light, leaving the winter night outside. But I carried with me the quiet certainty that the greatest inheritances weren't those written in legal documents or transferred through banks, but those passed from heart to heart, those that changed not just circumstances, but character, not just finances, but futures. Grandpa Harold's secret will had indeed given me the farmhouse and the trust. But his true bequest had been the opportunity for all of us to discover who we might become when old patterns were disrupted and new possibilities emerged. In that, he had been more generous than any of us could have imagined. The following morning, I woke early to find Megan already in the kitchen, reviewing applications from wellness practitioners interested in joining our expanding team. "I'm thinking we should add a nutritionist," she said without looking up. "Someone who specializes in farm-to-table approaches, who could create seasonal programs based on what we're growing here." "That makes sense," I agreed, reaching for the coffee she'd already brewed. "It strengthens the connection between the orchard and the wellness offerings." She nodded, making notes. "And for the spring, I've been researching regenerative farming practices. If we're going to expand the orchard, we should do it in the most sustainable way possible." I smiled at this evidence of her continued growth, not just following immediate impulses, but thinking long-term, considering impacts beyond the obvious. Grandpa would approve. "I know," she said softly. "I feel him here sometimes, watching us figure things out. Not judging, just witnessing." The observation resonated with my own experience. There was a sense of presence in the farmhouse. An orchard, not ghostly or supernatural, but the natural continuation of a strong spirit that had shaped the land and the family connected to it. "I've been thinking about Mom and Dad," Megan continued, setting aside her paperwork. "About how much they've changed, too. Dad actually asked for my opinion on his investment portfolio last week. Like, seriously asked, not just making conversation." "That's significant," I acknowledged. "They're seeing us differently. Both of us. I keep wondering what would have happened if Grandpa hadn't intervened the way he did. If he'd just divided everything equally and hoped for the best." I considered this as I gazed out at the winter morning. Nothing would have changed. We'd have continued in our established patterns. You burning through resources without developing discipline, me achieving without recognition, our parents enabling your ventures while taking my stability for granted. "A comfortable kind of dysfunction," Megan observed wryly. "Exactly. Familiar, predictable, limiting." I turned back to her. Grandpa understood that sometimes growth requires disruption, discomfort, challenge. "The ultimate act of love," she mused, "caring enough to create conditions for change rather than just providing comfort." Her insight surprised me. Another reminder of the thoughtful woman emerging from beneath years of indulged impulsivity. Later that morning, as we walked the perimeter of the orchard discussing spring planting plans, Megan paused by the heritage. Apple sapling Eleanor had brought, now carefully stored in the greenhouse awaiting suitable planting weather. "I think we should make this a tradition," she suggested. "Each year on Grandpa's Memorial Day, we plant something new in the orchard, not just maintaining what exists, but expanding it, building on his legacy." "I love that idea," I agreed. "And I've been thinking about the business structure too," she continued. "The equal partnership we discussed. I want to make it official as soon as possible." I studied her face, searching for any hint of the old Megan, the one who made grand pronouncements in moments of enthusiasm only to abandon them when difficulties arose. But I saw only clear-eyed determination, the expression of someone who had learned the value of commitment. "Are you sure?" I asked gently. "The current arrangement is working well. There's no rush to change it." "I'm sure," she said firmly. "This isn't about legal structures or money, Becca. It's about acknowledging what's already true, that we're building this together, that we each bring essential strengths to the table, that we're better as partners than we ever were as competitors." Her words touched something deep within me, the recognition that we had indeed moved beyond old rivalries into genuine collaboration. "All right," I agreed. "I'll call Marcus tomorrow to start the paperwork." She smiled, linking her arm through mine as we continued our circuit of the dormant orchard. You know what's strange? A year ago, losing my inheritance felt like the worst thing that could happen. Now I realize it was actually the beginning of finding something much more valuable. "And what's that?" I asked, though I suspected I knew the answer. "Myself," she said simply. "My real capabilities, not just my fantasies about what I might do someday. And you, the sister I never really knew because I was too busy competing with her." As we walked back toward the farmhouse, our footprints marking the snow-covered path, I reflected on the complex journey that had brought us here. The initial shock and anger when the secret will was revealed, the resistance and resentment, the slow, sometimes painful process of re-examining ingrained patterns, the gradual emergence of new ways of relating, of seeing each other, of being family. None of it had been easy. All of it had been necessary. Inside, I found a message from Dad on my phone. He and Mom wanted to talk about potentially downsizing from their family home, perhaps moving closer to the farmhouse property. "More than just visits during retirement," he'd written. "Being part of what you girls are building there." The suggestion would have been unimaginable a year earlier, my parents seeing value in proximity to my life and work rather than just Megan's. It represented yet another shift in our family ecosystem, another old pattern giving way to new possibilities. As January gave way to February and February to early March, the first hints of spring began appearing around the farmhouse. Snowdrops, pushing through melting snow, buds forming on the orchard trees, days gradually lengthening toward equinox. Orchard wellness continued to thrive, our winter retreats drawing participants from across the Pacific Northwest, our wait list growing for the expanded spring offerings. Megan and I finalized our equal partnership agreement with Marcus, restructuring the business to reflect our mutual commitment, independent of trust requirements. Our parents found a smaller home 15 minutes from the farmhouse, beginning the process of downsizing from the family home where imbalanced patterns had taken root decades earlier. On the first truly warm day of spring, we gathered as a family to plant Eleanor's heritage apple sapling, establishing the tradition Megan had suggested. Dad dug the hole while Mom prepared the soil amendments. Megan documented the process for our business social media while I held the slender tree. "To new growth," Dad said, as we carefully positioned the sapling, tamping soil around its tender roots. "And to Harold," Mom added, who knew that sometimes the most important part of an inheritance isn't what's given, but what's required. As we stood back to admire our planting, I thought about the journey still unfolding, for each of us individually and for our family as a whole. Not a fairy tale ending, but a continuous process of becoming, of growing toward our better selves, of building relationships based on authentic recognition rather than convenient patterns. The inheritance that had initially seemed to divide us had become the catalyst for a different kind of wealth altogether. The riches of genuine connection, of work aligned with values, of family dynamics based on respect rather than convenience. In that sense, Grandpa Harold's true legacy had been not just the property or the trust fund, but the wisdom to understand what his family truly needed. Not comfort, but challenge. Not ease, but growth. Not avoidance, but truth. As spring sunshine warmed the newly planted sapling, I silently thanked my grandfather for his foresight and courage, for loving us enough to disrupt our comfortable dysfunction, for seeing not just who we were but who we might become, for crafting an inheritance, designed not merely to transfer wealth, but to transform lives. The journey wasn't complete. Such journeys never are. But the path forward was clear, illuminated by the wisdom of a man who understood that sometimes the greatest gift is not what we want, but what we need. Not what maintains comfortable patterns, but what challenges us to grow beyond them. Not what divides, but what ultimately unites, through the sometimes difficult but always worthwhile process of becoming our truest, most authentic selves. The first anniversary of orchard wellness arrived with the autumn harvest. The farmhouse property had transformed completely in 2 years, from Grandpa Harold's quiet retirement home to a thriving wellness retreat centered around the expanding orchard. The heritage apple sapling we'd planted had taken root, its slender trunk now sturdy enough to stand without support. "Hard to believe how much has changed," Mom remarked as she helped arrange centerpieces for our anniversary celebration dinner. She and Dad had settled comfortably into their new home nearby, becoming integral parts of our operation. Dad managing the expanding orchard with unexpected passion, Mom developing the herb gardens that supplied our treatment products. "Sometimes, I still expect to wake up and find it was all a dream," Megan admitted, checking place settings at the long harvest table we'd set up beneath the orchard's oldest trees. "That I'm back in my apartment, planning another doomed venture, taking everyone's support for granted." I understood the feeling. Despite all evidence of our success, the profitable business, the healed family relationships, the personal growth, there remained moments of wonder at how dramatically Grandpa Harold's intervention had altered our trajectories. The evening celebration brought together everyone who had become part of our journey. The wellness practitioners who worked with us, Marcus and his wife, Nathan from my former firm, local farmers who supplied our kitchen, regular clients who had become friends. As twilight descended, fairy lights illuminated the orchard, creating a magical atmosphere of abundance and possibility. Dad stood to offer a toast, his face reflecting contentment I hadn't seen before Grandpa's passing. 2 years ago, we gathered to mourn Harold's departure. Tonight, we celebrate how his wisdom continues to shape our lives. He gestured to the thriving orchard, to Megan and me seated side by side. He planted seeds more valuable than these trees, seeds of truth, of recognition, of genuine support. And look what has grown from them. As dinner progressed into dessert featuring our own apples, I found a quiet moment with Marcus away from the festivities. "I've been meaning to ask you something," I said. "When Grandpa first approached you about the codicil, did you think it would work? That it would actually change anything?" Marcus considered the question thoughtfully. "Harold wasn't trying to punish anyone," he said finally. "He was creating conditions for growth he believed was possible, but unlikely to happen without intervention. He saw potential in all of you that existing patterns were suppressing. But wasn't it risky? It could have fractured the family completely." "Every meaningful change involves risk," he replied simply. "Harold believed the risk of continuing as you were. With Megan never developing discipline, you never receiving recognition, your parents never seeing the imbalance was greater than the risk of disruption." Later, as guests departed and cleanup began, Megan joined me on the farmhouse porch, both of us savoring a moment of quiet after the busy evening. "I found something in Grandpa's desk yesterday," she said, pulling an envelope from her pocket. It was addressed to both of us, with instructions to open it on the 2nd anniversary of his passing. We exchanged glances, remembering the previous letter that had moved us all so deeply. "Should we wait until the actual date next month?" I asked. Megan shook her head. "I think tonight is right. The harvest, the celebration, everything coming full circle." Inside the envelope was a single page, Grandpa Harold's handwriting instantly recognizable. "My dear granddaughters, if you're reading this, then 2 years have passed, and I hope my rather unconventional estate planning has borne fruit more valuable than apples. Not wealth divided, but wisdom shared. Not inheritance allocated, but insight gained. What I wished for you both was partnership rather than competition, recognition rather than assumption, growth rather than comfort. The courage to break patterns that limit rather than liberate. Remember this truth. The most valuable things we inherit aren't objects or assets, but perspectives and possibilities. The wisdom to see clearly, the courage to act with integrity, the capacity to love without limitation. Whatever you've built, together, in business, in relationship, in understanding. Know that it emerged not from my planning, but from your choosing. I simply created conditions. You created outcomes. May the orchard continue to flourish in all its forms. With enduring love, Harold. We sat in silence as evening deepened around us, fireflies appearing like earthbound stars among the orchard trees. Finally, Megan spoke. He gave us the greatest gift possible, she said softly. Not things, but transformation. Not comfort, but challenge. Not what we wanted, but what we needed. I nodded, watching the lights from our celebration still twinkling among the trees. The inheritance that mattered was never about property or money. It was about becoming who we were capable of being all along, Megan finished. About seeing each other clearly, perhaps for the first time. As night settled fully over the orchard, I thought about how profoundly Grandpa Harold's wisdom continued to shape our lives. Not through control or coercion, but through creating conditions where truth could emerge and growth could happen. His secret will had indeed changed everything, not by dictating outcomes, but by disrupting patterns that prevented possibility. The real inheritance had never been the farmhouse or the trust fund, but the opportunity to discover what lay beyond comfortable limitations, the chance to become more authentic versions of ourselves, to build relationships based on genuine recognition rather than convenient assumptions. In the distance, the heritage apple sapling stood straight and strong against the starlit sky. Small, but steadily growing, its future full of promise. Like our family, like the business we'd built together, it had needed not just nurturing, but the right conditions to truly flourish. Grandpa Harold had understood this fundamental truth. Sometimes the greatest inheritance isn't what we receive, but what we become when old patterns are broken and new possibilities emerge. In that wisdom lay his most enduring legacy. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.